Welcome, Grace.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you for your time and thank you for inviting me to your wonderful workspace. So, please tell us a little bit about yourself. Like you mentioned that you were born in Michigan, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your family background, your parents, where they come from, and what was it like growing up?
So, as a first generation American and a child of immigrants,
Mhm.
I always, I felt like I grew up almost like there was always this, fire in my belly where
Mm.
I always felt like I had something to prove, that there was always this chip on my shoulder because growing up, so my mom and dad would always talk about the hardships of their home countries.
Mhm.
So, my mom specifically was born and raised during she was raised during the Cultural Revolution.
Mhm.
And I actually come from a long generation
Mhm.
of teachers.
Mhm.
But because my mother was the daughter of two school teachers, she was not allowed to ultimately go to college. And so as a result, she moved here
Mhm.
and really persistently emphasized education. Not just when she was so proud she got her GED
Mhm.
here, and she had to learn English as a second language,
Mhm.
teaching us, spelling bees and, how to write and do
Yeah.
cursive writing. And I'll never forget, that was something that was so powerful for me that my own mother,
Mhm.
who could not get an education herself,
Mhm.
she always emphasized that education came first above everything. Dating, meeting up with, friends, boys, school projects and school and grades came
Mhm.
first. Which is pretty common for a lot of, Southeast Asian
I'm very
families.
familiar with
Yes,
that.
exactly. Oh, heck yeah, Deepak. And so I grew up with that. And then I had this very interesting perspective from my father. So he, born and raised in Taiwan. Well, he was from China, but he and his family, so he was the oldest of four children.
Mm.
And my father and his parents fled from mainland China
Mhm.
to Taiwan during, Chiang Kai-shek, at the end of the revolution. And so what I ended up hearing from him was how important it was, the importance of family and relationships. And my father has always been very liberal. So what was really powerful that I found growing up was that I never felt once like I was anything less than awesome to him, that he had always wanted to have an oldest daughter. And that was something that was really empowering because even when I was younger, I actually was very introverted. So having that support, having that father's support and emphasis on education is important. You are a leader, Grace. In the beginning, I would always try to create these little organizations and clubs and tell my dad about it. And he loves supporting that and nurturing that and always pointing out that amongst our family, my sister was my greatest champion and advocate and cheerleader, and I was meant to be her, greatest leader and caregiver and protector. So having that instilled in me a certain set of core values that were really focused on community and giving back to family and community and people who, when my dad talked about who do we help, he often pointed out, right, it was not just our immediate family, but anyone who, so he used to do, volunteer events or have us go volunteer at the library. Gosh, it's been forever since I've thought about that, but he would always emphasize the importance of us going and, working with people who might have, maybe not as much access to education. Or in the case of him, he always thought his English was very poor. And he would always say that. He was like, Grace, you and Tammy, my sister, are so lucky because your English is so fluent. You should help other people, first generation immigrants or other people like myself. Often we would check his documents and review things he was filling out, whether it was government forms or paperwork. And that was really empowering to see this sort of, my father could recognize that we had knowledge to share, even though we were so much younger than him, so much younger.
This must be a very, very proud moment for a father who could see his daughters helping him with his work and like in terms of documents, checking documents, English. Like, you must feel so like, I've achieved these daughters. Look, they're so much capable than I am. and your mother gave you the fire to go for the education, just get it and then do it. And your father also has provided you with some kind of a generosity aspect, like, while you're also getting all this information and knowledge and degrees, you should always be giving back.
Exactly.
Right.
And almost always pointing out what was so helpful was that my mother was so focused on helping emphasize that fire and that drive, where she didn't have her education. So, she emphasized the importance of education in our lives, even sharing stories like, I would forego meals, or I would study in candlelight, or I would pull leeches off of my legs because
this is your mother telling
that's
you.
my mother telling me what she had to do because she couldn't go to college and she didn't get that proper education, even though she was a straight A student. And then on the flip side, my father emphasizing and constantly pointing out, which was so helpful for my sister and I, looking back, reflection was such a strong skill set he nurtured in us, where he would point out in real time, oh, you learned this in school. Think about how this relates to what your mother and I may or may not have had growing up. And that was really powerful. And finally, my father, to this day, you're so right. He's so proud of the entrepreneurial accomplishments, which it was divisive back in the day. So my father,
Divisive how?
Divisive in this way. So rewind the clock. My father and my mother, I'll never forget that when I first started this path down medical device development. So when I first started my master's program at the University of Michigan, they could not understand why, and it was a sign of the times too, where entrepreneurship was not as much widely recognized as a career path. So in 2012 to 2013, when I got my master's degree, I remember my mom and dad taking me aside and saying, "Are you sure you want to do this as a degree program?
Are you sure? What are you doing,
Exactly.
Grace?"
Exactly. And saying literally, like, "Are you," I memorably, my dad said, and I remember this very powerfully, he was like, "Why aren't you taking this material science engineering degree and then working at a Fortune 50 company?" Which, very valid point, because that would have been the more established career path. Get on the career path, get your 401k, do something an established corporation where there's low risks versus creating a medical device from scratch. And at the time, I was setting up and running clinical trials. So my father has always been a really good reality check, where I felt as though in order to be a successful entrepreneur and CEO, I had to basically identify all of the critical risks, something that could sink or crash a business model early, because right away my parents told me that there was no financial support. If things did not go well with the startup with Warmaloo, there was no financial wherewithal or safety net or backup to support me should the startup fail. Additionally, if in our clinical trials infants died, there was no backup or support. Like if there was a lawsuit or anything, my parents made it clear that this was all on my shoulders. So that was quite the thing to realize, as at the time I was a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, learning and realizing this. So it made me really grow up really quickly, try to understand budgets really quickly, and do risk mitigation and assessments of risk, which is such an important part of entrepreneurship. Many people don't realize that being an entrepreneur and an early stage founder and CEO, one of your main jobs is you're not running towards risk, you're identifying it and trying to reduce it.
So what is amazing about your whole story is that your mother gave you the fire or the motivation to go for the education. Your father taught you generosity, but you took both the things from both your parents. But also, Grace Shah became her own person by believing in her dreams and following them through and creating something that your both parents had huge doubts about. And so you didn't just follow what they said, but you also had your own dreams, and you said, like, let me do what I'm doing, and I think I know what I'm doing, right? I'm okay. And now they're both parents are saying, yes, it was a good decision.
That's right. That's right, Deepak. And a funny little story, I'll make it short. The first point of validation was nothing that I said or did, right? I remember we got one of our first grants, nothing big, less than $50,000, during my master's program at a pitch competition. And my mother, who worked at the post office at the time, she used to do like mail sorting. And so she'll never forget, but there was an article. It was, I believe, the Detroit Free Press ran an article on Warmaloo and my experience in the Masters of Entrepreneurship program, which was
Wow.
new at the time. And yes, and she's the type of person, to your point, hardworking, very dedicated and committed, goes the extra mile. She was taping, so it's a long sort of, when they printed it, it was one of those longer sort of magazine article formats. And so it got caught in the machine frequently. So she was taping one of the issues together. And as she's taping the page, she realized that it was me. The page had torn on my story.
Oh, no.
Yes. And that's where she then realized, and at the time, my mother and father had actually, to really emphasize how much of a divisive issue this was, for a month or two, they wouldn't talk to me.
Oh.
They literally said, we're going to let you work this out on your own. And there were some very, hard decisions made, including that they would step back and not, provide support financially, and that they would cut off conversations until I came to my senses. But then here was this news article, and all of a sudden my mother and father realized there might be something here. Our daughter is maybe moving about this in the right direction,
Maybe
because
she's
it's
doing something right.
Exactly. This isn't a news story. And
it's
that,
like, example in Indian context would be your kid, like a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid wants to play cricket, and the parents want them to study, and all one day they see their kid, on TV, like, what? Maybe he's doing something right.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what happened.
So.
Yeah. So, and I hope, and I don't mind sharing that too. My parents, of course, are back in my life. They love their granddaughter. She's their first baby. And so, but it's really powerful. It speaks to how different of an environment, at least what I was raised and growing up in terms of how acceptable being an entrepreneur is or was. And today it's like there's a pitch competition in every city. There's a Shark Tank. There's so many more avenues where entrepreneurship is more accepted today. And there's more ways that you can see it in the media, whether it's Shark Tank or people talking about their own stories of their ventures,
right.
Especially in, I think, the Asian American and like Southeast Asian immigrant networks too now, like these communities where before, I don't think those stories were shared as often. And usually if they were shared, it was around points of failure.
Well, thank you so much
for
sharing all the stories. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you, Deepak. Great being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.